I won here too.
He's learned from Djokovic. He's learned from Nadal.
You want to be the best, you have to beat the best.
Carlos Alcaraz's comeback has just taken another disturbing turn. Cincinnati is gone. 4 months have passed, and he still has not played a competitive match. At 23, Carlos Alcaraz is still out. His wrist remains the problem. The comeback keeps slipping away. Now the question feels darker. Is he risking early retirement? That fear exploded after Cincinnati. Some headlines now scream, "Aggressive wrist rehab fails." But the truth behind that claim changes everything. As of August 12th, Alcaraz is training in Murcia. He still wants the US Open. His camp calls the recovery cautious. Sources deny a fresh setback. Yet the damage to his season is obvious. Roland Garros disappeared first. Wimbledon followed. Canada never happened. Cincinnati then collapsed from the plan. Nobody has announced retirement. Alcaraz says he wants a long career. That should calm the panic. It does not. His team is already protecting the future instead of chasing the next trophy. Subscribe if you want the real story behind tennis's biggest drama. Barcelona was only the beginning. What followed exposed something more worrying. One match changed his entire season. Soon, every conversation centered on the wrist, and fans still do not know why. The real reason this comeback keeps slipping away is where the story becomes truly frightening. That answer starts with the kind of detail fans usually overlook. Alcaraz is not trapped in a dramatic medical emergency. He is trapped in the much colder territory between being healthy enough to train and being ready enough to compete. Those are not the same thing. A practice court can be controlled. Match tennis cannot. The speed rises. The ball arrives heavier. Reactions become instinctive. A player stops protecting the injured area because the score does not care about caution. That difference is the heart of this story. His team understood that almost immediately after Barcelona. Speed was never the first priority. Preventing one bad decision from turning a manageable wrist problem into something that could define his career mattered more. That is why the rehabilitation began with protection instead of aggression. The wrist was rested. Stress on the joint was reduced. His conditioning continued without forcing the injured side to carry full tennis load. Later, racket work returned in stages. Even then, the right hand was not asked to resume normal duties immediately. That matters because the title sounds as if Alcaraz attacked the rehab, pushed too hard, failed, and then stumbled toward an early exit from the sport. The verified sequence tells a different story. The real danger comes from how much caution has already been required. A reckless comeback would be easy to explain. A delayed return after months of conservative work is harder to dismiss. It raises a more uncomfortable question. How much competitive stress can this wrist absorb before confidence disappears again? Confidence is not a minor issue for a player built like Alcaraz. His forehand depends on violence that looks effortless. Late acceleration lets him create speed from positions that would force other players to defend. The wrist is involved in every one of those moments. Nobody needs to exaggerate that fact. His style places enormous demands on the entire hitting chain, from the legs through the torso and into the arm. When the final link becomes uncertain, a player does not simply lose power. He can start changing decisions. That is why a return date can become dangerous even when scans, treatment, and training all look encouraging. The athlete might feel normal during controlled hitting. Then competition introduces a completely different problem. A desperate passing shot cannot be rehearsed in advance. Returning late against a heavy serve may load the wrist at an awkward angle. During a 3-hour match, those stresses can repeat until the body gives a clearer answer. The medical question becomes inseparable from the tennis question. Alcaraz has already given the clearest clue about his own thinking. He said during the early stage of this injury that he preferred to return later at full recovery because he wanted a long career. That statement should sit at the center of every discussion about retirement. No retirement intention has been announced, and Alcaraz has never suggested that the wrist destroyed his future. His public position points in the opposite direction because he is willing to lose tournaments now if that protects the years ahead. That choice sounds sensible until the cost becomes visible. Roland Garros carried far more weight than an ordinary calendar stop because he was the defending champion there. Wimbledon also meant much more than ranking points. His game had already become part of the tournament's modern identity. The North American summer then arrived without the clean reset fans expected. Canada went by. Cincinnati became another absence. Each decision protected the wrist, but each decision also increased the pressure on whatever came next. That pressure now sits over the US Open. The tournament is not an ordinary comeback location. Hard courts punish the body differently from clay. The ball can rush through the court, defensive movement becomes sharper, the serving load can climb quickly. New York also brings heat, humidity, noise, night sessions, long days, and best-of-5 matches. None of those conditions automatically makes a return unsafe, but together they create a brutal environment for a player who has not faced official competition since April. This is where the comments from outside experts become relevant. Stephen Smith, whose work focuses on athlete health and performance, said he would be surprised if Alcaraz returned directly at the US Open. His concern was not built around a claim of permanent damage. It was built around progression. After such a cautious rehabilitation, jumping straight into the hardest format in men's tennis would represent a massive competitive leap. That observation fits the timeline better than any dramatic theory about a failed recovery. Andy Roddick raised a similar point from the perspective of someone who knows the sport's physical demands from the inside. He made clear that he did not possess private medical information. His concern was practical. A player returning from a long layoff usually wants some form of match testing before a Grand Slam. The reason is obvious. Practice can answer only part of the puzzle, while competition exposes variables that controlled sessions cannot reproduce. A wrist might tolerate 90 minutes of structured hitting, then react differently to 4 hours of unpredictable pressure. That is why Cincinnati mattered so much. More than a warm-up event, Cincinnati offered a bridge between rehabilitation and New York. Best-of-3 matches could have given Alcaraz information without immediately demanding the full Grand Slam load. His withdrawal removed that bridge. It did not prove the wrist had deteriorated. Sources close to his camp specifically pushed back against the idea of a setback. Still, the absence left fewer places to test the body before the US Open. Winston-Salem has therefore appeared in discussion as a possible final step. A wild card could theoretically place Alcaraz into match conditions before New York. Nothing about that option guarantees he will take it. The possibility simply illustrates how narrow the runway has become. His team must balance two competing needs. He requires real competition to know where he stands, yet every additional event introduces another opportunity for the wrist to be stressed before the major he is trying to defend. This tension explains why the phrase early retirement can attract attention even without a retirement plan. Careers are not shortened only by dramatic announcements. Accumulation can change them quietly, beginning with skipped events before spreading into modified training and more selective scheduling. Certain surfaces may become harder to justify, while recovery periods can gradually grow longer. None of those outcomes has been confirmed for Alcaraz. They are the fears that naturally appear when a 23-year-old with his workload loses months to the same general hitting side that has troubled him before. His 2024 right forearm issue gives that concern context, but it must be handled carefully. The current problem is a right wrist injury. The earlier issue involved the forearm. They should not be presented as the same diagnosis. What the history does show is that Alcaraz has already experienced disruption on the arm that drives his forehand. He recovered from that previous problem and then won major titles. That recovery is a reason for optimism, not evidence of inevitable decline. The same caution applies to comparisons with Juan Martín del Potro or Dominic Thiem. Tennis fans hear the word wrist and immediately remember careers that were transformed by injury. Del Potro underwent repeated wrist procedures and lost huge sections of his prime. Thiem struggled to regain his previous level after a serious wrist problem. Their stories explain why fans react strongly. They do not provide a medical forecast for Alcaraz. No credible source has established that his injury follows either path. Still, history gives the current situation emotional weight. Wrist problems can be stubborn because elite tennis does not ask the joint to perform one movement. The player serves, returns, accelerates, blocks, stretches, defends, improvises, and repeats. A wrist that feels good during one pattern may react differently under another. That uncertainty can become mentally exhausting. The athlete is not only testing pain, he is testing trust. Trust is everything for Alcaraz because hesitation would attack the qualities that make him special. His appeal comes from commitment. A difficult ball often triggers an attack instead of caution. Defense can become offense before opponents reset, while impossible angles and sudden acceleration define the rest of his threat. If the wrist starts entering his thoughts during those moments, even briefly, the tactical effect can spread across an entire match. No public evidence says that is happening to him now. That distinction has to remain clear. He is training. Reports indicate that the intensity has increased. His camp has described the process as cautious. The current uncertainty is about competitive readiness, not a confirmed inability to hit a tennis ball. Yet for a player at his level, the final step matters more than everything before it. Plenty of athletes can practice before they are prepared to survive a tournament week. The timing makes the situation even more dramatic because 2026 began as a season that looked ready to become historic. Alcaraz won the Australian Open and completed the career Grand Slam. He became the youngest man to reach that milestone. 7 major titles at 22 placed him in territory almost nobody reaches at any age. His record before the Barcelona injury was 22 wins against only 3 losses. Nothing about his form suggested a player losing control of his career. Then the season changed with one match. He beat Otto Virtanen in Barcelona, but the wrist problem emerged as the story afterward. The following weeks stripped away events that had once looked like opportunities for more history. Madrid, Rome, and Roland Garros all fell away before the grass season passed without him. By the time North America arrived, the discussion had shifted from trophies to readiness. That transformation is what makes the title emotionally believable even when its literal wording goes too far. A player can be at the peak of the sport and still discover how quickly momentum disappears. Rankings can be defended later. Titles can be chased again. Physical confidence is harder to schedule. That is why Alcaraz's camp appears willing to sacrifice short-term opportunities. The decision is not an admission of failure. It is an acknowledgement that a 23-year-old career can be damaged by impatience, just as easily as by injury itself. Mark Petchey's comments also belong in this discussion because they were widely framed as an early retirement prediction. The actual substance was less alarming. Petchey suggested Alcaraz might not choose the extreme longevity path associated with Novak Djokovic, while arguing that even a 6-month absence would not necessarily change the trajectory of his career. His emphasis was on letting the wrist heal fully. That is very different from saying the current injury is forcing retirement. The distinction is crucial because rage bait only works when the eventual reveal is stronger than the bait. The frightening question is not whether Alcaraz is secretly preparing to leave tennis. There is no evidence for that. The stronger question is whether this injury will force him to manage his career differently from now on. That possibility remains open because the competitive return has taken far longer than fans expected when the problem first appeared. Career management can sound boring until it starts changing what fans get to see. Fewer tournaments could become necessary. Longer recovery blocks might appear. His team may become more conservative with smaller events. Surface choices could be reviewed. Training loads may receive even more scrutiny. None of that means Alcaraz would suddenly stop dominating majors. In fact, selective scheduling can extend elite careers. The point is that the conversation has arrived much earlier than anyone expected. That early arrival is why the broader workload debate matters. The Professional Tennis Players Association has recently raised concerns about injury patterns and the demands placed on players across the calendar. Its analysis pointed toward an increase in upper body and arm injuries during the early part of 2026. That finding does not prove the schedule caused Alcaraz's wrist problem. It does show that his case is unfolding inside a sport already arguing about how much physical load top players should absorb. Modern tennis rewards availability while simultaneously punishing it. The biggest names are expected to appear at major events, Masters tournaments, team competitions, exhibitions, sponsor obligations, and promotional stops. Travel compresses recovery. Different surfaces demand physical adjustments. The calendar rarely offers a perfect moment to stop. A player who feels a warning sign can either step away and lose momentum, or continue and risk making the problem worse. Alcaraz chose the first option. That choice deserves more attention than the absence itself. Plenty of young champions have been tempted to prove toughness by returning early. Alcaraz's team appears to be resisting that pressure. The current plan has looked almost frustratingly patient. That patience is why Cincinnati became so revealing. If this were simply about tolerating discomfort, he might already be back. The decision to withdraw suggests that his camp values complete readiness more than the appearance of progress. This is also why words such as healed can mislead fans. A report that a wrist is medically healed does not automatically mean a player is prepared for tournament tennis. Tissue recovery, strength, mobility, confidence, endurance, and repeated match load are different pieces of the same comeback. A positive medical assessment can coexist with caution. The public sees a binary answer. The athlete lives inside a spectrum. Alcaraz's current situation seems to exist somewhere inside that spectrum. Training can continue at higher intensity, while tournament targets remain visible and his team stays optimistic. Even so, the competitive return can still be delayed. That is not contradictory once the difference between practice readiness and tournament readiness is understood. It is also the reason the story remains unresolved. The unresolved part creates the real suspense around New York. If Alcaraz enters the US Open without a warm-up event, every early round becomes a physical test as much as a tennis match. A routine straight sets win could calm the discussion quickly. A long first-week battle could do the opposite. The wrist would not be the only concern. Match fitness, timing, movement, and decision-making after months away would all be tested under the brightest possible spotlight. If he chooses not to play, the reaction will be just as intense. Missing another major would be a huge story for the defending champion. Fans would immediately ask whether the injury is more serious than the camp has admitted publicly. That conclusion would still not be automatic. A withdrawal could simply reflect the same conservative philosophy Alcaraz has expressed from the beginning. Protect the future first, accept the short-term cost. That philosophy becomes especially important when the player already owns achievements most professionals never reach. Alcaraz does not need to chase one desperate tournament to validate his career. 7 majors already sit beside a completed career Grand Slam, and he has also spent time at world number 1. Those accomplishments give his team room to think beyond the next Sunday. Ironically, his early success may make caution easier. The danger is psychological pressure from everything surrounding him. Fans want answers. Tournament organizers want star power. Broadcasters want the biggest names. Rivals continue collecting points and titles while he watches. Every new withdrawal creates headlines that make patience look like weakness. A 23-year-old can feel ancient in tennis when another elite player is winning in his absence. That environment can push athletes toward decisions their bodies are not ready to make. So far, Alcaraz appears to be resisting that trap. His public comments have stayed focused on full recovery and longevity. The rehab timeline supports that message. His team has not rushed him from splint to competition. Reports of gradual hitting and increasing intensity fit a controlled process. Even the Cincinnati withdrawal, frustrating as it was, aligns with caution rather than panic. That does not make the story comfortable. It makes it more serious. A careless rehabilitation failing would offer a simple villain. The real situation has no easy villain. The wrist became a problem, his team responded conservatively, and progress followed without producing a competitive return yet. The uncertainty survives because there is no single dramatic mistake to blame. This is where fans should separate fear from evidence. The fear centers on a wrist problem that could shorten his career, while the evidence currently shows months of absence caused by a protective approach. Claims that the rehab failed go beyond what is known because he is training and progressing, even though competition remains delayed. Retirement talk also outruns the record. Alcaraz has said he wants a long career and has indicated nothing different. The gap between those two versions is exactly where the title lives. It takes a genuine concern and pushes it toward the most frightening possible outcome. That outcome has not happened. The reason it feels plausible is the timing. Alcaraz is only 23, his game is brutally physical, and the injury affects the side that powers his forehand. Months have passed without completing the comeback. Those facts are enough to make the question uncomfortable without inventing an answer. There is also a strategic consequence if this episode changes how his team builds seasons. Alcaraz has traditionally played with explosive intensity across surfaces. His schedule has often demanded rapid transitions. A more protective approach could mean choosing fewer events before majors or adding longer training blocks. That might disappoint tournaments in the short term. It could also make him more dangerous when he does appear. Novak Djokovic's longevity is often treated as the standard everyone should chase, but that career is an extreme case. Pecci's point was that Alcaraz may not need or want to follow the same path. A shorter career by choice is completely different from early retirement caused by injury. The current wrist problem does not erase that distinction. What it does is force the longevity conversation into view much earlier. The next decision will reveal more than any rumor. Entering a warm-up event would suggest his camp wants a controlled competitive test before New York. A direct jump to the US Open would mean trusting the preparation built in training. Another withdrawal would show that the conservative strategy still outweighs competitive urgency. Each option carries consequences. None automatically means his career is collapsing. For fans, the hardest part is deep uncertainty. Tennis usually gives clear answers through results. A player wins or loses. An injury recovery is different. Progress happens away from cameras. Medical decisions are private. Training sessions reveal only fragments. One video can look encouraging while the tournament schedule tells a more cautious story. That tension creates space for dramatic headlines, but it also demands discipline when separating what is known from what is feared. What is known is already significant. Alcaraz has not competed since Barcelona. The right wrist caused a long absence. His rehabilitation has been conservative. Major tournaments were sacrificed. Cincinnati did not become the planned bridge back. He remains focused on returning, and his public goal is a long career. Those facts make the situation serious without turning it into a retirement announcement. What remains unknown is the part that could shape the next phase of his career. People outside his medical circle cannot know how the wrist will respond to 5-set competition. A permanent guarantee against recurrence does not exist. His future schedule could also look different after this episode. Those unanswered questions are why every comeback decision now feels larger than one tournament. That is also why the phrase career preservation keeps returning to the center of the story. Alcaraz has already shown he can win everything. The challenge now is preserving the body that allows him to keep doing it. A player at 23 is usually thinking about expansion rather than limitation, with more tournaments and bigger rivalries ahead. Instead, his team has spent months calculating what the wrist can safely tolerate. There is a cruel irony in that shift. The more successful Alcaraz becomes, the more tennis demands from him. Deep runs create more matches, while major titles bring sponsor obligations and rivalries increase attention around every appearance. The body that creates the success also absorbs the cost. His wrist injury has made that exchange impossible to ignore. The US Open will therefore be watched for reasons that go far beyond whether Alcaraz can defend a title. If he plays, fans will study the forehand. They will notice every shake of the hand. Any medical timeout will trigger instant speculation. A clean performance could quiet months of anxiety. One visible problem could send the retirement narrative into overdrive. That is the emotional environment waiting for him. Alcaraz does not control that noise. He only controls the decision. His team appears to understand that the smartest comeback may be the least satisfying one for everyone else. Missing another event can look dramatic from the outside. From inside the camp, it may simply be risk management. That is where the title finally turns on itself. The fear of early retirement is not coming from a confirmed plan to quit. The realization that Alcaraz's career already needs unusual protection is what creates the fear. Failed aggressive rehabilitation is not supported by the actual process, which has been cautious. What keeps the serious concern alive is the delay. A patient recovery that still requires patience can feel more unsettling than a rushed comeback that obviously went wrong. That does not mean fans should expect the worst. Alcaraz has recovered from physical problems before. Current training progress offers reasons for optimism, and his age still gives him time. The restraint shown by his team also works in his favor. The dramatic question remains because the final proof can only arrive under competitive load. There's another reason the next appearance matters so much. Alcaraz will not be returning to a neutral environment. Returning as a 7-time major champion brings expectations created by the absence itself. Opponents will test the forehand immediately, stretching rallies toward the injured side and forcing uncomfortable contact whenever possible. That is normal competition, not exploitation. Every player looks for uncertainty. The first few matches could therefore expose whether the wrist is merely pain-free or truly trustworthy under pressure. A successful return would not require instant perfection. It would require freedom. Alcaraz needs to swing without protecting the joint, move without anticipating discomfort, and compete without calculating the next morning. That standard appears to explain why his team has remained so patient. The next match will replace speculation with evidence. Until then, every training update matters only as preparation. Tournament tennis remains the standard that can settle whether this wrist problem was an interruption or warning. Until that happens, every prediction is incomplete. An immediate return to Australian Open form remains possible. Rediscovering timing might instead take several tournaments, while New York could ultimately arrive too soon. The range of possibilities is wide because the most important test has not happened yet. That is why Barcelona changed more than one season. It forced Alcaraz to confront a problem that every great athlete eventually meets. The body sets limits even when ambition does not. Most champions meet that lesson later, but Alcaraz encountered it at 23, immediately after one of the greatest starts to a season of his career. The next chapter will tell us whether this becomes a temporary interruption or the moment his career begins to be managed differently. Those are very different outcomes. The evidence currently supports caution, not catastrophe. Still, the question behind the title will not disappear until Alcaraz proves that his wrist can survive the exact tennis that made him a superstar. Tell us in the comments whether Carlos should protect the long career he says he wants, even at the cost of another major. Fans who believe he should test himself before New York can make that case too. Subscribe to the channel for more tennis stories where the headline is only the beginning, because the next decision from Alcaraz could change the entire conversation around his future.